aquí en este museo. Aquí, miren qué belleza, señores. Wow. Mucha gente llegando, muchas personas. Qué bonito. Miren qué linda esa mesa. ¡Ah! ¡Qué belleza! Esto aquí, miren. Es como cuando tienen una reunión o algo, una actividad. Miren qué bella. Wow. Espectacularmente hermoso esto aquí. Este es un museo. Después le pongo el nombre de cómo se llama el museo. Wow. Miren estas sillas. El tour comienza ahí, second floor, segundo piso. Dice que tienen, miren ahí, programa de vacaciones summer, programa para niños. Diferentes actividades. Wow, qué bello, papi, grábamelo. Wow, qué bello. Señor que recibía un honor. Gran hall, gran salón. Miren esto, qué belleza. Wow. Miren esta. Esto es una campana. Wow, miren eso, esta cortina. Ay, esa, miren. Qué bonito. Ahí es que es el segundo piso. Tour continúa, dice, continúa el tour, como el paseo. El tour es en inglés para subir. Miren qué belleza. Wow. Ahora hay que esperar a que salga el grupo que entró para nosotros entrar. Pero son unas escaleras hermosas. Nos están dando, comenzó el tour. Qué belleza. Me están explicando. Es un arte esa pieza. Tomaré una foto a lo largo.
Okay.
A la este.
Sí,
Esa la. Le había puesto la la
no,
cara.
pero mira, aquí se coge.
Sí, pero para uno ponerlo aquí, tú tenías que ponerlo más de cerca. La foto.
De una foto. Y queda.
Ok.
Una foto.
Yo estoy grabando. Bueno, te está corriendo. Qué bello. Miren cómo se ve desde aquí. Qué hermoso. Ah, miren esto aquí. Wow. Qué belleza.
We have some portraits on the wall of family members. I'm going to use those to talk about Henry Flagler's early life. There's a man with a white beard in the corner near where I'm standing, to the right of the fireplace, right of the window. That gentleman is the Reverend Isaac Flagler. That's Henry Flagler's father. He was a Presbyterian minister. He was born in Dutchess County, New York, about 65 miles north of New York City. His family had been in New York and in New England for many generations, but originally they were of German descent. When Reverend Isaac
Dan un
Flagler
tour
wanted
en
to
el
go to
museo
church,
aquí.
he
Fíjate,
found
están
himself
hablando
moving
aquí.
further and further upstate in New York, and he settled in the Rochester, New York area. Henry Flagler, his portrait's over the fireplace. He was born outside of Rochester in a little tiny town called Hopewell in 1830. Now, as I mentioned before, he only went to school through 8th grade. So, 1844, he was 14 years old, he had finished 8th grade, he left home and went to work.
Una pequeña biblioteca.
That seems shocking to us now, but back then it was actually
Miren
pretty
qué
common.
hermosas esas
And
sillas.
Henry Flagler, he was a smart kid. He didn't just leave home without a plan. His plan was to work his way west along the Erie Canal, which was a successful enterprise by then, and he was going to head to Ohio because his mother, Elizabeth Caldwell Flagler, had relatives who left upstate New York earlier, settled in Ohio, and they were doing very well for themselves. They had a bunch of general stores, they had a grain business, they had a distillery. So Henry Flagler felt sure that if he could get there, that they would give him a job. And that's exactly what happened. So he got a job in one of their general stores, sweeping the floors and stocking the shelves. They gave him $5 a month. But they gave him a cot to sleep on, and they fed him. So that was okay in 1844 for an unskilled laborer. Now, he worked really hard, which they expected he would. But he surprised them all by having a great head for business. He kept thinking of ways that they can improve their income that they hadn't even thought of for themselves as grown-ups. So he quickly moved up in the business, and by the time he was 19, he was the head salesman of all their stores. And instead of making $60 a year, he was making $400 a year. I'm going to just pause for a second. Everyone could watch where their feet are and make sure you're on the high traffic carpet in the center. Thank you. So anyway, so now he's making $400 a year. That was very good money in 1849. his money, and when he was 22, he bought into the business. So now he wasn't just an employee, he
Sí,
was
estoy grabando con él las manos.
really smart in there. And when he was
No lo
23,
puedes
he got
pagar ni
married for
perseguir.
the first time. So
No.
we shift gears and talk about his personal life a little bit. We have a portrait of his first wife in this room. It's to the left of the fireplace, left of the window. It's a smaller, dark portrait, and she has her hand on her cheek. That's Mary Harkness Flagler, Henry Flagler's first wife. Now, she was never in Palm Beach. She was never in this house. This is the house of the third wife. But she is a really important source story. So we added this portrait once this became a museum. She's important story in a few different ways, but primarily, she and Henry Flagler were married for 28 years. The only children that he had was with this wife. And it's one of their grandchildren who founded this museum. So that's a really big thing. Another thing is that his first wife, Mary Harkness Flagler, she had respiratory problems throughout her life. And so in their marriage, living in Ohio, it was, their marriage was really all about family and about church, and for Mr. Flagler, about work and doing well and making money. As time went by, he, of course, was doing better and better in the business. He met a young businessman, John Rockefeller, through the grain business. They happened to live on the same street in Cleveland, Ohio, and they had offices in the same building, so they often walked to work together. In the 1860s, oil had been discovered in Ohio and in Pennsylvania, and Mr. Rockefeller had an idea to start an oil company. He asked his friend Henry Flagler if he was interested in getting in on this new business. And they asked a third guy, a chemist named Samuel Andrews, no one's ever heard of him. So they started in 1866, Rockefeller, Andrews, and Flagler Oil. By 1870, it was Standard Oil. It was one of the most profitable corporations in American history. And in the 1870s, they moved the headquarters from Ohio to New York City, financial capital of America. And it was then that the families moved to New York. And Mrs. Flagler with her respiratory problems, she got new doctors right away in New York who suggested she come to Florida for the winter. Now, in the 1870s, Florida was really undeveloped. It was really considered the last frontier east of the Mississippi, and the train only went as far as Jacksonville. There weren't any luxurious hotels. She had no desire to come here, especially not without Henry, and he was too busy working. So time was going by, and she wasn't getting any better, and the doctors kept saying, you should go to Florida for the winter. So in the winter of 1878, they compromised, and they came to Jacksonville, Florida for 3 weeks. 3 weeks in Jacksonville, not enough to cure her of a lifelong respiratory problem. And she ended up, over the next couple of years, developing consumption, which we know as tuberculosis, and that is in fact what killed her in 1881. But those 3 weeks in Jacksonville, standing by the beach, gave Henry Flagler a peek into a place he had never seen before and never really imagined was so nice, and the weather was so good, and the light was different, and the flowers and the trees were different. So 2 years after his first wife died, he got married again. He married a redheaded actress, a woman named Ida Alice Shorts, and they ended up getting divorced. I'm not going to spend any time really talking about her. But we have to get through wife number 2 to get to wife number 3, and
Wow.
we have to get to Florida. They came to Florida on their honeymoon in December 1883. This time, Mr. Flagler and the new Mrs. Flagler, they took the train to Jacksonville and they took a boat down the St. Johns River. They had to take a couple of other conveyances, but they made their way to St. Augustine. You guys been to St. Augustine? Oh, some of you. For those of you who haven't been, at some point you should go. It's been continuously lived in for more than 450 years. It's really charming and historic. And for those of you who've been there, imagine it before fast food and before gas stations and motels. So Henry Flagler, really, that's when he fell in love with Florida. And he couldn't believe in the 5 years since he'd been to Florida, nobody had worked on anything nicer.
No podía andar con el tripo porque me dijeron que no podía entrar con el tripo grabando. Podía grabar pero quitar el celular del tripo.
Nobody else was going to do what he was going to do.
Tripo.
And so he started buying up land buying up all the short railroad lines, like 10-mile lines or 6-mile lines, joining them
Explicando
together.
todo lo que lo del museo.
Started building bridges over the rivers, and before you know it, he was really changing the entire East Coast of Florida.
Ese es el nombre del museo.
But in any case, Henry Flagler, he stayed on the board of directors of Standard Oil because, of course, you know, he liked being one of the decision makers. But he had really a whole other career here in Florida, and we'll continue talking about that as we move on. But the first wife is what introduced him to Florida.
Dando todas las instrucciones, explicando toda la historia de las personas que están aquí.
Two more family portraits. They are on either side of the window, opposite where I'm standing. Yeah, you might have to scooch around a little to see. The one on the right-hand side of the window, that large portrait, that's the first of the 3 children that the Flaglers, Mrs. Flagler, number 1, and Henry Flagler had. That's Jenny Louise Flagler. A couple of sad stories here, actually. She died from complications from childbirth in 1889, and her baby didn't make it either. For those of you who've been to St. Augustine, there's a church in St. Augustine that has a big domed roof, really elaborate church, and it's close to Flagler College, which, by the way, Flagler College started off its life as Henry Flagler's first Florida hotel. It was the Ponce de Leon Hotel, and it opened in 1888. This daughter passed away in 1889. Henry Flagler had Carrera and Hastings, who designed this house and designed that hotel. He had them design that really elaborate church. It's the Memorial Presbyterian Church of St. Augustine, built in memory of this daughter. And he, Henry Flagler, had Jenny Louise and her baby laid to rest in the mausoleum at that church. He had his first wife moved from New York to that mausoleum. And then when he died himself in 1913, that's where he wanted to be laid to rest. So it is a working church, but it's also a really important family landmark.
Tan
Another sad
hermosas.
story, the second of the 3 Flagler children, you don't even have to
Tan
her name was
bella.
Carrie, and she was only 2 and a half when she passed away in 1861. Back then, we had 80 years before antibiotics were discovered. We didn't have vaccines for children, and so infant mortality was a sad fact of life. Lots of children did not make it to adulthood. Now, the third of the 3 children, his portrait is on the left-hand side of the window. That's Henry Harkness Flagler. He was the youngest of the kids, the only boy, and the only one who lived a good long life and married and had children of his own. And we'll
Puedes
talk
seguir
more
para
about
allá,
him at the
¿sabes?
very end of the tour because it's one of his daughters who founded this museum. So we're going to go into the next room and meet the third wife. I can walk and talk at the
Se
same time.
mueve,
Does anybody
sí.
have any questions?
Para que se mueva.
No? All right.
Ven aquí. Dios mío, qué belleza.
Functions as an art gallery for the Flaglers. It is the music room, but this was the design, the decor design of the time. And on your left, between 2 of the exterior doors, is a large portrait of a woman. That's Henry Flagler's third and last wife. This is her house. So that's Mary Lily Keenan Flagler. She was born and raised in Kenansville, North Carolina. That gives you a hint. Her family were really prominent North Carolinians. They owned a lot of land. They were one of the founding families of the University of North Carolina. Mrs. Flagler grew up in really different
Wow,
economic
qué belleza.
circumstances, but also she was
Una belleza
a lot
total.
younger than Henry Flagler, which meant she was also of a different generation. When they got married, he was 71 and she was 34. I know. I cannot add.
Mamma mía.
But because she was so much younger and she was from a whole different generation, she went to college. So here, he only went to school through 8th grade, and in his time, only about 40% of American men even finished 8th grade. But in her time, women started going to college. So she went to an all-women's school in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's called the Peace Institute. It's still there. It's co-ed now. It's called Peace University. But it was all women when she was there. She studied music. She loved music, she loved to play the piano. She wanted always to be surrounded by music, and so that's why we have her portrait here in the music room. Now, in this portrait, Mary Lou is wearing a couple of pieces of jewelry that were both engagement presents from Mr. Flagler. On her left hand, her lower hand, she's wearing a pretty large Burmese ruby ring. That was her engagement ring at a time before diamond rings were the tradition. And then the pearl necklace that she's wearing, that was also an engagement present, it was a 60-inch strand of perfectly matched, naturally occurring Pacific pearls. Cultured pearls hadn't been invented yet. So this was an incredibly expensive piece of jewelry. Tiffany Company made this for her. It was the most expensive piece of jewelry that Tiffany had ever made up until that point. And when Mr. Flagler bought this in 1899, it was just about $1 million.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a little less than $1 million.
Oh my gosh.
Rounded to $1 million. Then, of course, Henry Flagler built this house for Mary Lily. It was $2.5 million to build the house and $1.5 million to furnish it. So it's pretty clear that he was really smitten with his new young wife. You might wonder where they met, because they are so different. By the time Mrs. Flagler finished college, she was in no hurry to get married. She went to New York City for the opera. She went to Newport, Rhode Island, and stayed with family friends there in their summer cottage. If you've been to Newport, Rhode Island, you know the summer cottages are like this house, so hardly a cottage at all. So she also would come to St. Augustine in the wintertime. So they ran in the same social